Some nights don't end with gunshots. They end with a woman standing alone in the dark, pressing a man's coat against her chest like it's the only thing keeping her from falling apart. And the most dangerous man in Los Angeles watching her through a security feed, unable to move. Damien Kwan has faced assassins, federal agents, and rival syndicates. He has never once flinched. But tonight, watching Marisol Brooks cry in silence, asking for nothing, blaming no one, he feels something crack open inside his chest that no bullet has ever reached. Someone else is watching too, and they are already planning to destroy everything. If this story hits you, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this one travels. Stay with me until the end. You won't regret it. The security feed flickered at 11:47 p.m. Damien almost missed it. He was already in the underground garage, jacket slung over one arm, keys in his other hand, mind buried somewhere between the Nakamura shipment delay and the threatening silence coming out of the Chicago syndicate. His driver had the engine running. The night air smelled like exhaust and burnt asphalt, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in Los Angeles after midnight, when the city pretends to sleep but never really does. He glanced at his phone out of habit. The security app was still open. One of his men had flagged an alert from the executive floor. Motion detected, camera 7C, CEO, private office, and Damien almost dismissed it without looking. Almost. He tapped the feed. The office was dark except for the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 41 floors up, Los Angeles looked like something from a dream. All amber and silver and impossible distance. And standing in the middle of that dream, barely visible in the half-light, was Marisol Brooks. She had her back to the camera. She was holding his overcoat, not doing anything with it, not folding it, not hanging it, not carrying it somewhere, just holding it. Both arms wrapped around the dark wool, face buried against the collar, and her shoulders were shaking in the slow, controlled way of someone who has trained themselves not to make a sound when they cry. Damien did not move for 11 seconds. He counted them later in the silence of his own head, because he had nothing else to do with the time. His driver said something. He didn't hear it. He was watching a woman he had worked beside for nearly 3 years fall apart in his office, completely alone, believing no one could see her. There was no performance in it, no calculation. He had spent his entire adult life reading people for angles, for manipulation, for the precise moment when sincerity tips into theater. He saw none of that now. What he saw was worse, the specific, devastating privacy of grief that a person only allows themselves when they are absolutely certain nobody is watching. He turned away from the car. "Go home," he said to his driver. "Sir?" "I said go home, Marcus." He was already walking back toward the elevator. Marisol heard the elevator doors open. She had exactly 3 seconds to pull herself back together. She dropped the coat, too fast, wrong, and it slipped off the chair arm and landed half on the floor. She left it. Her eyes were dry by the time she heard his footsteps on the marble hallway, or at least dry enough that the room was dark and he would never know. She crossed to the window and stood with her hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the city like she was reviewing strategy reports in her head, like she hadn't just spent the last 8 minutes crying into the wool of a coat that smelled like cedar and expensive restraint. Damien stopped in his doorway. Neither of them spoke. "Working late," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Forgot my laptop charger." She didn't turn around. "I came back for it." "You've been here 40 minutes. A beat. She felt her jaw tighten. "The cameras. Always." She turned then, because standing with her back to him felt like surrender of a different kind. He was still in the doorway, jacket over his arm, and he looked, as he always did, like a man who had personally decided what the rules of gravity were and found them reasonable. Korean American, mid-40s, the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something sharper and harder and more interesting than handsome. He wasn't looking at her with pity. She would have walked out immediately if he had been. He was looking at her the way he looked at problems he hadn't yet figured out how to solve. "Your charger," he said. "What?" "It's on your desk. You walked past it when you came in." She looked. It was exactly where he said. She had not come back for her charger. "Marisol." "Don't." The word came out flat and final. "Whatever you're going to say, don't." He was quiet for a long moment. She heard him set his jacket down on the conference table. She heard him cross the room, not toward her, to the small bar cart near the bookcase, and she heard the particular sound of glass on glass, bourbon being poured, and then he was standing beside her at the window, not touching her, 6 inches of charged air between them, holding out a second glass. She took it. They stood there looking at Los Angeles for a while. "I'm not asking for anything," she said eventually. Her voice was steady now. 3 years of steadiness had built itself into her bones. "I want you to know that. I haven't been waiting around expecting something. I know what your situation is. I've always known." "I know you know." "Then why are you here?" He turned his glass slowly in his hand. "Because I was in the garage and I saw you on the camera and I came back upstairs." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now." She looked at him then, really looked. And the thing she hated most about Damien Kwan was not his power or his silence or the wall he had built around every feeling he'd ever had. It was that in moments like this, alone, with no subordinates watching and no empire to perform for, he looked almost human, almost reachable. And she had learned, slowly and at great personal cost, that almost was the most dangerous word in any language. "You should go home," she said. "Vivian isn't there." "Then you should go to wherever Vivian isn't." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite pain, something in the narrow territory between them. "You're the only person in my life who tells me what to do and means it for my benefit." "Damien, I'm not saying it to manipulate you. I'm saying it because it's true, and I've been not saying it for 3 years, and I'm tired of being fluent in silence." She set her glass down on the windowsill. Her hands were not shaking. She was proud of that, in a small, private way. "There's a difference," she said carefully, "between being tired of silence and being ready to say the true thing out loud. You haven't said anything yet. You've described a feeling. That's not the same." He looked at her for a long time. Outside, a helicopter crossed the skyline, its red light blinking in and out. "I think about you," he said. "Not about the work. About you. Every day." "I know." "You know. I've known for a long time." She picked up her charger finally. The real reason, the false reason, the object that had become irrelevant the moment he walked in. "That's what makes this harder, Damien. Not easier. If you didn't feel anything, I could just leave it somewhere and move on. But you do feel it, and you've been sitting with it for years inside a marriage that both of you treat like a business contract, and nothing changes, and I am not—" Her voice caught, just once. A single fault line in the steadiness. "I'm not going to let myself become the reason you feel less trapped. That's not love. That's just transferring the cage." He didn't say anything. She picked up her bag. "I'll have the Nakamura files on your desk by 7, she said. "Marisol." "Good night, Damien." She walked out. He stood at the window for 20 minutes after she left. The bourbon sat untouched. The overcoat was still half on the floor, and he didn't pick it up. Damien Kwan had been born into a world where weakness was a wound other people exploited. His father had taught him that before he was 12. The organization had reinforced it before he was 20. By the time he had built Blackstone Global into something that existed on paper as a legitimate international investment empire and existed in reality as the operational spine of the West Coast's most powerful criminal network, he had learned to treat every feeling as a liability and every attachment as a potential leverage point in someone else's hands. He was good at it. He was very, very good at it. And then Marisol Brooks had walked into a job interview 3 years ago. Overqualified, underestimated, wearing a blazer that cost less than his coffee machine and carrying a portfolio that was better than anything his previous 3 assistants had produced combined. And she had sat across from him and said, with complete composure, "I'm not interested in being impressive in the interview. Tell me the actual problem you need solved, and I'll tell you whether I can solve it." He had hired her on the spot. He had spent the next 3 years watching her be exactly what she said she was, every single day, without performance or agenda. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, he had made the mistake of letting her see him think. Not the curated version of thought he performed for his board and his lieutenants. Actual thought. The kind with wrong turns and admissions, and the particular ugliness of a powerful man realizing he has optimized his entire life around the wrong things. She had never used it against him. He picked up the overcoat off the floor, hung it on the chair properly. Old habit. He thought about what she had said, transferring the cage, The precision of it was almost violent. She had, in 11 words, described exactly what he had been doing, using her patience, her steadiness, her quiet care, as a way to make an unlivable situation livable without actually dismantling it. And she had refused, not with anger or ultimatum, with clarity. He pulled out his phone and stared at his contacts for a long time. Then he made a call he had been avoiding for 14 years. Vivienne Park answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had known he would call eventually. Damien, we need to talk. A pause. In the background, he could hear the faint sound of her apartment, the one she kept in Brentwood, separate from the house they technically shared in Hancock Park, the house where they slept in separate wings and maintained the architecture of a marriage for the benefit of two criminal dynasties that had agreed 14 years ago that a political union was more valuable than two people's freedom. I know, she said. You know. I've been watching too, Damien. I'm not stupid. I never have been. He didn't answer that. She's never done anything, Vivienne said. Her voice was even, almost clinical. He had always respected her composure. They had that in common. The trained stillness of people who learned early that emotion in the wrong room was a weapon in someone else's hands. I had investigators, for months. She's never crossed any line. She's never asked you for a single thing she wasn't owed professionally. I know. That's almost worse, isn't it? It wasn't a question. If she had been scheming or manipulating or trying to take something, that would be easier to be angry at. He didn't say anything. He was looking at the city again. The helicopter was gone. Our fathers made a deal, he said finally. They made a lot of deals. Most of them were wrong. A long pause. I'm tired, Damien. I want you to understand that. Not of you specifically. Of what this is. Of what we've been performing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been thinking about a conversation I need to have with my father. And I think you should probably have a similar one. And I think after that, we should both be very honest about what we actually want for the next 20 years of our lives. Another pause. Her voice was quieter when she continued. She's remarkable. I don't enjoy admitting that, but I'm not a liar. The line was quiet for a while. Get some sleep, he said. You too. He ended the call and stood in the empty office for a long time, the coat on the chair, the city outside, the bourbon warm and untouched. He did not feel free. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down into the dark, calculating the drop, knowing he was going to jump, not yet knowing if there was anything below worth landing for. 3 floors below in the underground parking structure, a black SUV sat with its engine off and its lights killed. Inside, a man in an expensive suit was forwarding security footage to an encrypted server. Not Vivienne's investigators. Not anyone connected to Gideon Park's organization. Someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching Blackstone Tower for 6 weeks, cataloging patterns, building a file, waiting for exactly the kind of vulnerable, emotional, compromising moment that transforms a fearless man into a manageable one. He had what he needed now. The woman in the office holding the coat. The crime boss who came back upstairs instead of going home. The phone call to Vivienne at midnight. All of it captured. All of it ready to be used. He typed a single message to a number registered to a shell company in Dubai. He's exposed. She's the pressure point. Moving to phase 2. He sent it. He started the engine. He had no idea that 1 floor above the garage, a different set of cameras, older, independently operated, installed years ago by a man named Gideon Park, who trusted no one completely, not even himself, had just captured everything he had done. The game was already more complicated than anyone knew, and Marisol Brooks, driving home alone through the empty 2 a.m. streets of Los Angeles, had no idea that by morning, someone would be deciding exactly how much her quiet, uncrossed loyalty was worth as a weapon. The text came at 6:14 a.m. Marisol was already awake. She had not slept well. 3 hours, maybe less. The kind of broken rest where you're conscious of being unconscious, where your brain keeps replaying conversations and finding new angles on old words. She was standing in her kitchen in a worn Howard University t-shirt, waiting for coffee to finish, when her phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. Los Angeles area code. We should talk, not about work, about what you're walking into. A friend. She stared at it for a long time. The coffee maker beeped. She ignored it. In her line of work, in Damien's world, which had become her world by proximity and by the slow erosion of professional distance, anonymous warnings came in two varieties. The first kind was genuine. Someone scared, someone peripheral, someone who knew something and had just enough conscience left to pass it along. The second kind was bait, a hook dressed up as concern, designed to pull you off balance and into the open where someone else was waiting with a net. She deleted the text. Then she poured her coffee and sat down at her kitchen table and spent 45 minutes going through the Nakamura files like she had promised, because the one thing she had always been able to control, in a life that had handed her very little control, was the quality of her work. She was at her desk by 7:02 a.m. The files were on Damien's desk by 7:08. He wasn't in yet. That was unusual. Damien Kwan was almost always the first person in the building. She had learned his rhythms in the first 3 months and never unlearned them. 6:45 arrival, 2 espressos, 30 minutes of uninterrupted reading before he spoke to anyone. His absence now felt like a held breath. She went back to her desk and did not think about him. She failed, but she did not think about it. He arrived at 8:20 with dark circles under his eyes and the specific tightness around his jaw that meant he had been making decisions all night and was not finished making them. He stopped at her desk. Cancel my 9 o'clock. It's the Hargrove refinancing. They flew in from, I know who they are, reschedule. To when? I don't care. He was already moving toward his office. Next week. Tell them I'm sorry. She watched him go. In 3 years, she had never once heard him tell her to tell someone he was sorry. He said a lot of things. Apologies were not in his vocabulary. She rescheduled the Hargrove meeting. Then she pulled up the building security log from the previous night out of habit. She managed administrative access as part of her role and scanned the timestamp records. Camera 7C, executive floor, showed standard motion log entries. Camera P2, underground parking, showed a 47-minute gap. She looked at that gap for a long time. 47 minutes of no recorded footage, starting at 12:03 a.m., ending at 12:50. She knew enough about the system architecture to know that gaps like that didn't happen by accident. They happened when someone who understood the recording infrastructure deliberately created them. She picked up her desk phone and called building security. Martinez, it's Brooks. I'm looking at a footage gap on P2 last night, 12 to 12:50. What happened? A pause. Too long. System glitch. We flagged it for maintenance. When was it flagged? Another pause. This morning. Who filed the flag? Ms. Brooks. I'm not sure Who filed it, Martinez? It came from upstairs, executive authorization. She set the phone down carefully, not hard. She was very precise about not slamming things when her hands wanted to. Upstairs. Executive authorization. That meant either Damien or someone with access to Damien's credentials. She thought about the text message she had deleted. She thought about it very carefully. She knocked on his office door at 9:15 after the Hargrove team had been apologized to and redirected, and after she had spent 20 minutes deciding whether this was her business. It was not her business. She had been very clear with herself, last night and for 3 years before it, about the precise location of the line between professional and personal and the importance of staying on the right side of it. And yet here she was, knocking. Come in. He was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, papers spread in front of him. He looked like he was building something or tearing something down. It was hard to tell with him. Those two activities looked nearly identical from the outside. She closed the door behind her. She put her phone on his desk, screen up, with the security log pulled up and the gap highlighted. He looked at it. His face didn't change. That was its own kind of answer. Someone was in the garage last night, she said. Yes. While you were still in the building. Yes. And the footage covering that window was wiped from an executive-level credential this morning. He leaned back in his chair. He was looking at her the same way he had looked at her last night, like a problem he hadn't figured out yet, except now there was something underneath it. Something that looked almost like fear, which on Damien Kwan looked wrong, like a word in the wrong language. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. Marisol, sit down. She sat. He was quiet for a moment, organizing something inside himself. She had watched him do this before. The deliberate assembly of honesty, which for Damien was a slower process than for most people because he had spent so many years building around it. There's someone watching this building, he said. Not connected to Vivian, not connected to Gideon Park's operation. Someone external. We became aware of them approximately 10 days ago. 10 days. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. She breathed in through her nose, out slowly. Why not? Because I wasn't certain of the threat vector. And because... He stopped, started again. Because you were already in a complicated position adjacent to my life, and adding surveillance anxiety on top of that felt like something you could decide for me. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who knows he is wrong and is mature enough not to argue about it. Yes, he said finally. That's paternalistic, Damien. I know. I work in this building. I have for 3 years. If someone is surveilling the building and I am in the building, then I am being surveilled. That is not a peripheral concern. That is my life. I know. Stop saying you know like it fixes it. He didn't say anything to that. She gave him credit for it. She picked her phone up off his desk. The security log was still on screen. The gap was 47 minutes. Someone was parked in that garage for 47 minutes last night, and then left, and then someone wiped the footage this morning. Who wiped it? One of my security people, on my instruction. Why? He met her eyes. Because whoever was in that garage last night had camera equipment, long lens, professional grade, pointed at the building entrance and the executive elevator lobby, and because the timing, he paused. The timing was after midnight, after you left, after I... He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. She felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear exactly. The precursor to fear. The moment when the brain assembles enough pieces to understand the shape of what's coming before it can name it. They were filming, she said. Yes. Last night, while you were in my office. Yes. The cold thing settled deeper. She thought about standing at the window. She thought about the coat on the floor. She thought about bourbon and 11 words and the helicopter crossing the skyline. How much did they get? We don't know yet. Best guess. He held her gaze. Enough. She stood up. She needed to stand up. The chair felt like it was closing around her, and she needed the physical fact of standing, of being upright, of occupying space deliberately. Okay, she said. Marisol, give me a minute. She walked to the window. Not the same window as last night. His office window faced east toward downtown, toward the specific cluster of glass towers that represented the legitimate face of everything Damien had built. She stared at them. Someone has footage of me in your office after midnight, holding your coat, crying. She said it flatly, like she was reading a report. It was the only way she could say it without her voice doing something she would regret. And then footage of you coming back upstairs. And whatever the cameras in this room caught after that. The in-office cameras don't capture audio, but they capture image, yes. So whoever this is has a visual record of your executive assistant being in your office after midnight in an emotionally compromised state, and you returning to be alone with her. She turned from the window. What do they want? I don't know yet. What's your best guess? He was quiet for a beat. Leverage. Against you. Against the organization. Through me. Through you as a pressure point. She heard that phrase, pressure point, and something in her chest went very tight and very controlled at the same time. She had worked hard. Her entire life she had worked extraordinarily hard. Not for Damien, not for any man, but because she had something to prove to a world that had spent 34 years looking at a plus-size black woman from Compton and seeing less than what was there. She had built a professional reputation that was unimpeachable. She had kept her private life ruthlessly separate from her professional life. She had crossed no lines. She had given them nothing. And now someone had manufactured a version of her that could be used. I got a text this morning, she said. Unknown number, said we should talk. Said not about work. Said I should know what I'm walking into. Damien went very still. What time? 6:14 a.m. He picked up his own phone and made a call. One word when someone answered, Trace. Then he read the number she showed him. Then he ended the call. That's fast, she said. I have fast people. She sat back down. Not because the chair felt less confining now, it didn't, but because her legs were tired in the way that stress makes you tired, a deep physical exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. "Who are they?" she said. "The people watching. We have a short list. Tell me." "Marisol." "Damien." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "Tell me. Right now. Because you already made the mistake of deciding what I should know once this morning, and I'm asking you directly. And if you do it again, I will walk out of this office and not come back, and you can manage the Nakamura situation and the Chicago silence and whoever is in your parking garage entirely without me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder and slid it across the desk. She opened it. 3 photographs. 3 names. One of them she recognized, a name that had come up twice in shipping manifests she had flagged as irregular 6 months ago and then been told to forget about by Damien's head of operations. She looked up from the folder. "Reyes," she said. He nodded slowly. "I flagged his manifests 8 months ago. Your operations chief told me it was a misread." "It wasn't a misread." She closed the folder, set it back on his desk. Very carefully. "So your operations chief lied to me on your behalf. On the organization's behalf. Is there a difference?" He didn't answer that. "How long has Reyes been watching this building?" "We believe 6 weeks. And you've known about him for 10 days, and your operations chief has known about the manifest irregularities for 8 months. She paused. "What does Reyes want, Damien? Specifically?" "He's building a case, not legal. He's not law enforcement. He's a competitor. He wants documentation of vulnerability in our leadership structure that he can use to approach our partner organizations and suggest that Blackstone's management is compromised." "Compromised how?" He was quiet. "Say it. Emotionally compromised. Specifically, a CEO making decisions based on personal attachment rather than organizational interest. A senior executive whose loyalty to the organization cannot be verified because her loyalty to the CEO is..." He stopped. "Because people think I'm sleeping with you," she said. "Yes." "And now he has footage that looks like exactly that." "Yes." She stood up again. She couldn't help it. She moved to the door, then stopped, then turned back because she wasn't done, and leaving would be the wrong kind of exit. "This is what I want you to understand," she said. Her voice was very even. She had built the evenness over many years, and she used it now like a tool. "I have not crossed any line. In 3 years, I have not done a single thing that is professionally inappropriate. I have kept this..." She gestured between them, a small, precise gesture. Exactly where it should have been kept. "And because of your situation, and because of the world you operate in, and because of one night where a camera caught me being a human being in a private moment that was none of anyone's business, I am now someone's leverage." "Marisol, I'm not finished," she breathed in. "You told me last night you were tired of silence. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm tired of consequences. I'm tired of paying the price for geography I never chose. I never asked to be in your world. I took a job. I did that job extraordinarily well. And now my professional reputation, the thing I have worked for my entire adult life, is in the hands of a man in a parking garage because of feelings that neither of us have acted on." The room was very quiet. "What do you need from me?" he said. It was the right question. She noticed that he asked it instead of offering something. She noticed the precision of it and filed it away in the part of her that was always, even now, assessing. "I need to know everything," she said. "Not the version you decide I can handle. Everything. Reyes, the manifest, the Chicago situation, whatever is making the syndicate quiet, all of it. If I'm already a target, then I'm already in this, and I am not navigating something I can't see." He nodded. "And I need you to understand something." She met his eyes. "Whatever happens next between us, personally, it waits. It waits until this is resolved, and until the dust is clear, and until I can be certain that any choice I make is mine, and not something I'm being pushed into by external pressure. Do you understand that?" "Yes." "Because if I feel like I'm being protected or managed or moved around like a piece on your board, I will leave. I have left harder things than this." "I believe you." She picked up her bag from where she'd set it by the door. I'll need access to the full Reyes file by this afternoon, and I want to talk to your head of security directly, not through a relay. Done. She put her hand on the door. Marisol. She waited. I'm sorry, he said. For the decisions I made without you. I'm sorry. She didn't turn around. She absorbed it. The specific, unusual weight of Damien Kwan apologizing, which felt like watching architecture move. And then she opened the door. This afternoon, she said. The file. She walked out. What she didn't see, because she was already moving down the hall with her back straight and her face composed and every inch of her presenting the performance of a woman completely in control of herself, was Damien opening his desk drawer after the door closed and sitting very still for a long time staring at nothing. What she didn't know was that 6 minutes after she left his office, he received a call from a number in Seoul. What she didn't know was that the voice on the other end of that call said, "We know about the woman. We know about Reyes. And we know something you don't. Reyes isn't working alone. He has a partner inside your building. Inside, not outside. Someone inside Blackstone Tower had been feeding the parking garage cameras. Someone inside had handed Reyes the gaps in the coverage schedule. Someone inside knew which windows to point a lens at and when." Damien ended the call and sat very still for a long time. He thought about who had access to the security schedules. He thought about who had known his approximate departure time the previous night. He thought about who had administrative access to the building security logs, the same logs that someone had checked this morning, the same logs where a 47-minute gap had been discovered and immediately reported to him. He thought about how sometimes the most dangerous thing in any room is not the person with the most power. It is the person who has already been in the room long enough that nobody looks at them anymore. His hand was very still on the desk. His phone was in his other hand. He did not make the call he was thinking about making because he was not certain, and he had learned, at great and irreversible cost, that acting on uncertainty was how empires ended. But the seed was planted now, cold and poisonous, and it would grow in the dark corners of his thinking whether he tended it or not. Somewhere in this building, someone had betrayed him. And the woman he had just watched walk out his door, the woman who had asked him for everything and nothing in the same breath, who had refused to be managed or protected or moved like a piece, was either the only person he could trust completely or the most sophisticated betrayal he had ever. The name came back in 40 minutes. Damien was still at his desk when his head of security, a compact Korean-American man named Jin, who had been with the organization for 11 years and spoke approximately 9 words per day, walked into the office and set a single printed page on the desk without saying anything. Damien looked at it. He read it twice. Then he set it face down on the desk and sat very still for a long time, in the way that extremely dangerous people go still when they are deciding something. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of a system under enormous internal pressure that has not yet found its outlet. Jin was still standing there. "Where is she now?" Damien said. "Third floor conference room, meeting with the Nakamura legal team." "Who requested that meeting?" "She did. This morning. She told your scheduler it was a standard contract review." "Is anyone from legal actually there?" "2 associates, both junior. Neither of them would know what to look for." Damien turned the page back over. He looked at the name at the top of it again, as though looking at it a second time might change what it said. It didn't. The name was Cleo Vance, his executive scheduler. 26 years old, hired 14 months ago, impeccable references, a master's in operations management from USC, and according to the report Jin had just placed on his desk, a cellular account that had been in regular encrypted communication with a number registered to a subsidiary of Reyes Capital Group for the past 4 months. 4 months, while Marisol was filing reports, while Damien was managing the Chicago silence and the Nakamura shipment delays and the growing cracks in the Park Alliance. While all of that was happening, a 26-year-old woman with excellent posture and a quiet demeanor had been sitting 12 feet from Damien's office door, feeding information outward. "Does she know we know?" Damien said. "No. Keep it that way." "What do you want to do?" Damien stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He put it on with the methodical care of someone who uses routine to stay calm. He straightened the lapels. Nothing yet, he said. I want to talk to someone first. Jin nodded once and left. Damien stood alone in his office for exactly 30 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called Marisol. She answered on the second ring. He could hear voices in the background. The Nakamura lawyers, someone shuffling papers. I need you to step out, he said. A beat. She heard something in his voice. He knew she heard it because she didn't ask why. Give me 2 minutes, she said. He waited. She called back from a stairwell. He could tell from the acoustic, the hollow, slightly reverberant quality of concrete and metal, the specific quiet of a space that exists only for transit and never for lingering. What happened, she said. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not react visibly while I'm talking, because there may be cameras in the stairwell. A pause. Okay. The inside contact is Cleo Vance. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. Longer. Heavier. Say that again, Marisol said. Cleo Vance. 14 months on staff. She's been in communication with Reyes's organization for 4 months via encrypted channel. She had full access to the security scheduling, my movement calendar, your work schedule, and the building camera rotation logs. Another silence. She sat 6 feet from my desk, Marisol said quietly. Yes. She brought me coffee this morning. We talked about the Nakamura meeting. She laughed at something I said. Marisol, how much did she give them? We don't have a full picture yet, enough to map our patterns, enough to know when the parking garage cameras would have their blind spots. Enough. He stopped. Enough to know I'd be in the building late last night, Marisol said. He didn't answer that. His silence was its own answer. She breathed in through her nose, out slow. He could hear it through the phone, the careful architectural breathing of a woman reassembling herself in real time. What do you need me to do? She said. Go back into the Nakamura meeting. Act normal. Don't look at Cleo when you pass her desk. Don't change anything about your behavior. And then come to my office at noon and we'll talk. Damien. Her voice was very quiet. How deep does this go? What did she give them access to? He thought about the right answer. Then he thought about what he had promised her. Everything, not the version he decided she could handle. And he gave her the true one. She had read access to your personnel file. The stairwell was very quiet. My personnel file, Marisol said. Yes, which contains my home address, my emergency contacts, my financial disclosures. Yes. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something almost inaudible, which was somehow worse than if she had been angry. My mother's address is in that file, she said. I listed her as my emergency contact. I know. She lives alone in Inglewood, Damien. She is 61 years old. I have people going there right now, as we speak. She won't be alone today. A very long silence. I'm going back into the meeting, Marisol said. Marisol, I'm going back into the meeting, she said again. And then the line went dead. She walked back into that conference room and sat down and spent the next hour and 40 minutes reviewing contract amendments with 2 junior lawyers who kept nervously checking their phones. And she did not let a single thing she was feeling touch her face. Not the fear, not the fury, not the specific nauseating violation of knowing that a woman who had laughed with her this morning had spent 4 months dismantling the walls around her life. She was very good at her job. She had always been very good at her job. At 11:55, she gathered her papers, thanked the lawyers, and walked to the elevator. She passed Cleo's desk. Cleo was on the phone, pen in hand, nodding at something. Marisol did not look at her. She watched the elevator numbers descend in the reflection of the polished wall panel and kept her breathing even and her shoulders level. In the elevator, alone, she closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then the doors opened on the executive floor and she walked to Damien's office and went inside without knocking. He was not alone. Vivian Park was sitting across from his desk. Marisol stopped. The geometry of the room was wrong in a way she needed a moment to process. Vivian was the last person she had expected to see. Not because Vivian never came to the building, but because of the timing, the morning's revelations, the particular rawness of the last 16 hours, all of which had made the idea of this specific confrontation feel both inevitable and impossible. Vivian Park was 42, slender in the way of someone who has disciplined every soft thing about themselves into usefulness, with a face that was striking rather than pretty, and eyes that had the watchful, cataloging quality of someone who makes very few mistakes and forgets even fewer. She was wearing a stone gray suit. She had a glass of water in front of her that she hadn't touched. She looked at Marisol when Marisol came in. Marisol looked back. Damien stood up from behind his desk. "Come in. Close the door." Marisol closed the door. She did not sit down. Neither, she noticed, did she take a step backward. She stood where she was, near the door, giving the room its proper geometry. 3 people, 3 separate positions, nobody claiming territory they hadn't earned. "I should leave," Marisol said. "No." It was Vivian who said it, not Damien. Her voice was even and direct. "I came to see you both. Please stay." A beat. Marisol stayed. Vivian folded her hands on the desk. "I'm going to say this quickly because I don't enjoy long speeches, and I assume none of us do. I know about Reyes. My father's people have been tracking his organization for 2 months. His reach into the Park Syndicate's partner network is something my father takes as a personal insult." She paused. "I also know about Cleo Vance. We identified her 6 days ago." Damien went very still. 6 days. "Yes." "You've known for 6 days and you didn't—" "I needed to understand the full scope before I moved." Vivian's voice didn't change. "If I had told you immediately, you would have pulled her immediately, and we would have lost the intelligence pipeline. By letting her continue to operate, my father's team was able to map every communication she made and every piece of information she passed to Reyes's organization." She looked at Marisol. "Including the footage from last night." Marisol felt the room's temperature change, or maybe that was just her. "We know what they have," Vivian continued. "Images from the exterior cameras, long lens through the executive floor windows, you standing at the window, Damien returning to the building. The 2 of you visible through the glass, alone after midnight." She paused again, with the precision of a woman who pauses deliberately. "Nothing inappropriate. Everything that can be made to look it." "What does Reyes plan to do with it?" Damien said. "He has a meeting scheduled for Thursday with 3 of your Pacific Rim partners. He intends to present the footage as evidence that Blackstone's CEO is operating under compromised judgment, that personal entanglement with a senior staff member has created a conflict of interest that puts the organization's stability at risk." She looked between them. "He plans to use it to suggest that a leadership transition is overdue, and that his organization is positioned to facilitate that transition." The room was very quiet. "Thursday," Damien said. "That's 4 days." 3.5. Marisol moved finally to the chair beside Vivian. She sat down, not because she wanted to be closer to Vivian, but because her legs were making a decision her brain hadn't fully authorized, and she had learned to trust her body's intelligence even when she didn't enjoy its timing. "What does your father want to do?" Marisol said. Vivian turned to look at her directly. It was the first time in several years that Vivian Park had looked at Marisol Brooks directly, without intermediary or context, without the comfortable distance of a wife and a husband's employee occupying separate social orbits that never quite collided. "My father," Vivian said carefully, "is doing something I have never seen him do in 42 years of watching him operate." "What's that?" "He is admitting he was wrong." Gideon Park was 71 years old and built like a man who had decided sometime around age 40 that the world would accommodate his dimensions rather than the other way around. He operated out of a private office in Koreatown that looked from the outside like an insurance brokerage, which it partly was, in the same way that Blackstone Tower was partly a legitimate investment firm. He had agreed to meet at 2 p.m., not at his office, at a restaurant in Monterey Park that had been in the same family for 30 years and had the particular institutional quality of a place where serious people ate lunch when they didn't want to be seen being serious. Marisol had not expected to be included in this meeting. Damien had included her without being asked. She noticed that. Gideon was already seated when they arrived. He rose when they came in, which surprised her. She had not expected that kind of acknowledgement. He was a large man with heavy framed glasses and the deliberate measured movements of someone who had learned that speed was something you deployed strategically rather than constantly. He looked at Marisol with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Then he extended his hand. Miss Brooks, he said, I've been wanting to meet you properly for some time. She shook his hand. Mr. Park. They sat. Tea arrived without anyone ordering it. The restaurant understood its clientele. Gideon looked at Damien first, then at Marisol, then at the table, and then he did something she genuinely had not expected from a man of his stature. He sighed. It was a tired sigh. Not performative. The real kind. The sound a person makes when they have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and are putting it down, not because they found somewhere good to put it, but because they cannot carry it any further. My daughter called me last night, he said, after speaking with both of you. He picked up his tea, set it back down without drinking. She told me about Reyes. She told me about the footage. She told me some other things as well. He paused. Things I should have been told earlier, but wasn't, because I made myself difficult to tell things to. Damien said nothing. This was itself a kind of response. I had cameras installed in Blackstone Tower 9 years ago, Gideon said. Independent of your security system. I want you to know that. I want to be direct about it. Damien's jaw moved, just once. I didn't know about those cameras. No, you weren't meant to. Gideon looked at Marisol. I reviewed the footage from last night, from my cameras. Not Reyes's cameras. Mine. He paused. I saw you standing alone in that office holding Damien's coat. I saw you cry. I watched you pull yourself together before he came upstairs. I watched both of you at the window. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in this business for 47 years. I have seen every form of manipulation, every angle of self-interest, every variety of person using another person for advantage. I know what those things look like. He looked at Marisol steadily. What I saw last night was not any of those things. Marisol met his eyes and said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. I made a decision 47 years ago, Gideon continued, and then I made another one 14 years ago, and I have spent a great deal of time being very confident that both of those decisions were correct. Powerful men are good at being confident. It is one of our least attractive qualities. He folded his hands on the table. They were large hands, weathered, the hands of someone who had started with nothing and built everything and left marks on the world in the process. The marriage between my daughter and Damien was a business decision. I will not pretend otherwise. It served the alliance between our organizations, and it provided both families with a structural stability that benefited 47 people directly and several hundred indirectly. He paused. It also put two people inside a house together and asked them to perform a life they did not have. The restaurant around them was quiet, dishes being cleared somewhere, the distant sound of a kitchen. Vivian has been unhappy for 14 years, Gideon said. I knew this. I told myself it was a reasonable cost. He looked at Damien. You have been not unhappy. Something worse. You've been absent from your own life. I watched a man I considered something close to a son disappear inside a structure I built, and I told myself the structure was more important than the man. He was quiet. I was wrong. Damien's face was unreadable. Marisol had learned to read the unreadable parts of it, and what she saw there now was something she had never seen in 3 years. Not anger, not calculation, not the controlled blankness he used as armor. What she saw was the particular disoriented expression of a person who has been waiting for something for a very long time and is not sure, now that it has arrived, how to hold it. Gideon reached into his jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the table. He pushed it toward Damien. Vivian signed these this morning, he said. I witnessed them. They need only your signature to be complete. Damien looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. The alliance between our organizations stands, Gideon said. I want that to be clear. This is not a business dissolution. The partnership continues on its own terms, without the architecture of a marriage that neither party chose freely and neither party has inhabited honestly. Damien picked up the envelope. He opened it slowly, the way you open something when you're not certain what surviving it will feel like. Marisol looked at the table. This was not her moment to watch. Some things belonged only to the people inside them. She heard paper. She heard Gideon set a pen on the table. She heard nothing for a long time. Then she heard the specific sound of ink on paper and the particular silence that follows a signature. The silence of a door closing on one room and all the rooms beyond it being rearranged. Gideon picked up the documents. He returned them to the envelope. He looked at Marisol. "I understand," he said carefully, "that you have no reason to trust me, that the machinery of my decisions has placed you in danger that you did nothing to earn. I want you to understand that addressing that is not Damien's responsibility alone. It is mine." He paused. "Reyes will be handled. The footage will be neutralized. Cleo Vance will be removed from the building today. Your mother's address and contact information will be scrubbed from every system Reyes's organization has accessed." He looked at her steadily. "This is not a favor. It is a correction. There is a difference." Marisol looked at him for a long moment. "Your cameras," she said. "The independent ones, in the building." "Yes. They come down, today. If there's going to be any conversation about what comes next, the first condition is that there are no cameras in my professional space that I don't know about and haven't authorized." Gideon looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Not quite surprise, something more like recognition. The specific expression of a person who has spent their life underestimating certain people and is mid-process of revising that habit. "Agreed," he said, "and I want it in writing." A beat. Then, almost imperceptibly, Gideon Park smiled. "Damien," he said, without looking away from Marisol, "I understand now why you came back upstairs." The drive back to Blackstone Tower took 20 minutes. Damien drove. Marisol sat in the passenger seat and watched Los Angeles pass outside the window. The storefronts, the palm trees that always look slightly improbable against the gray concrete infrastructure. The particular human density of a city that contains multitudes of parallel lives that never quite touch. Neither of them spoke for 12 minutes. "I need to tell you something," Damien said. "Okay, the Reyes situation is not completely resolved. Gideon will neutralize the footage and remove Cleo and address the Pacific Rim partner meeting. That covers the external threat." He paused. "But Reyes has a partner we haven't identified yet. Someone higher than Cleo. Someone who was feeding him strategic information before Cleo was ever hired." Marisol turned from the window. "How long have you known that?" "Since this morning. The sole contact I mentioned. They have a partial communication record that indicates a second inside source with access to executive-level strategy documents. Not operational details, not scheduling, strategic documents. The kind that only 6 people in the organization see." She did the arithmetic quickly. 6 people. "Yes." "Who?" "Myself, my CFO, my general counsel, my head of Pacific operations." He paused. "And you." She felt the shape of what he was saying before he finished saying it. "And me," she said. "Yes." "So the second source is either your CFO, your general counsel, your head of Pacific operations." She paused. "Or me." "That's the math." She looked at him. He was watching the road. His hands on the wheel were relaxed, which, with Damien, meant nothing. He had trained himself to look relaxed the way other people trained themselves to run. As a discipline, as a practice, as a layer between what he felt and what the world could read. "You know it's not me," she said. "I know." "Then why are you telling me like this?" "Because you deserve to know the geometry. Because you asked me for everything and I promised you everything." He glanced at her. "Because one of 3 people I have trusted with the strategic architecture of this organization has been selling it piece by piece, and I need your help identifying which one." She turned back to the window. The city kept moving past, indifferent and enormous and full of people doing impossible things quietly, which had always been the part of Los Angeles she loved, and the part that terrified her in equal measure. "You want me to help you find the traitor in your inner circle," she said. "Yes." "While managing the Nakamura situation and the Reyes fallout, and whatever the Chicago silence turns into." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "And you're asking me to do this why? You have Jin. You have Gideon's people now. You have—" "Because whoever it is knows how I think," he said. "They've been reading my strategic documents. They understand my patterns, my priorities, my decision framework." He paused. "But they don't know yours. Nobody's been reading your mind for 4 months. You're the only person in this situation whose thinking is still uncompromised." She absorbed that. "If I help you with this," she said slowly, and we find this person, and the Reyes situation gets resolved, and the dust settles, Joe. Everything changes. You understand that. Everything has already changed. I mean, for me, professionally. I cannot remain your executive assistant after this. I won't. If I'm doing this work, if I'm operating at this level, if I'm sitting across from Gideon Park and negotiating conditions, then I am not an assistant, and I will not be treated like one. He turned into the Blackstone Tower parking structure. The car descended into the underground space, and Marisol thought involuntarily about the black SUV that had sat in this same darkness last night, filming everything, beginning the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Damien put the car in park. He turned to look at her. "No," he said. "You are not an assistant. You haven't been one for a long time. I think we both know that." She held his gaze. "I'll help you find your traitor," she said, "and then we're going to have a very different conversation about what I am in this organization." "I know. And the personal thing waits," he said, "until the dust is clear." "I heard you." She opened the car door. She was already moving when she heard him say quietly behind her, "For what it's worth, I would wait as long as it takes." She didn't respond, but she did not immediately go inside. She stood beside the open car door for one moment, just one, and let herself feel the full weight of everything the last 24 hours had dismantled and everything it had built in the rubble. And then she closed the door and walked toward the elevator. Behind her, Damien sat alone in the car in the underground dark of Blackstone Tower's parking garage, in the exact spot where a camera had filmed everything the night before. And he opened his phone and began composing a message to each of the 3 people who had access to his strategic documents. 3 slightly different versions of the same piece of false intelligence, specific enough to be credible, wrong enough to be traceable. Whichever version showed up in Reyes' possession would tell him exactly who had been selling him out. It was a clean trap, elegant, the kind of thing you designed when you had been patient for long enough and were finally ready to stop being patient. He sent all 3 messages. He got out of the car. He did not notice, as he walked toward the elevator, that a camera in the far corner of the parking structure, not his camera, not Gideon's camera, not Reyes's camera, but a 4th camera that none of them had accounted for, installed 14 days ago by a person whose name none of them yet knew, had captured every second of the conversation in the car, had captured his face when he looked at Marisol, had captured hers when she paused at the car door, and was transmitting in real time to someone in a building 2 miles away who had been watching Blackstone Tower for reasons that had nothing to do with Reyes, nothing to do with the Pacific Rim partners, and everything to do with something that had happened 11 years ago. Something Damien Kwan believed was buried so deep that the ground above it had forgotten what it was covering. The elevator doors closed behind him. The camera kept recording. The first message came back in 6 hours. Damien was in his office, jacket off, working through the Nakamura contract amendments that Marisol had flagged 3 days ago and that had been buried under everything else, when his phone vibrated on the desk. Not a call. A notification from a secure monitoring application that Jin had configured to track the 3 pieces of false intelligence he had seeded that morning. One of them had moved. He looked at the notification for a long time without picking up the phone. Then he picked it up. The intelligence fragment he had sent to his CFO, a deliberately fabricated detail about a proposed restructuring of the Pacific Rim partnership terms, had appeared, partially paraphrased but unmistakably derived, in an encrypted message to a server in Macau that Jin's team had been watching for 2 weeks as a known relay point for Reyes's communications network. Raymond Cho, CFO. 15 years with the organization. The man who had sat beside Damien through 3 federal investigations, 2 hostile acquisition attempts, and the restructuring that had nearly broken the entire operation 8 years ago. The man who had been in the room for every significant financial decision Blackstone had made in a decade and a half. Damien set the phone down. He sat there for a moment with both hands flat on the desk, and he breathed, deliberately, the way Jin had taught him years ago, the tactical breathing of someone who needs their hands to be steady and cannot afford the luxury of letting the body's chemistry make decisions. Then he called Jin. "Raymond," he said. That was all. A pause. Then, "When?" 20 minutes ago. "How do you want to handle it?" Damien looked at the window. The city was going gold in the late afternoon light, that particular Los Angeles hour when everything looks briefly beautiful before the dark comes in. Quietly, he said, I don't want this in the building. I want him in a room where I can talk to him without an audience. The Westwood property. Yes, tonight. Arrange it. And Marisol? He thought about that. She should know. I'll let you tell her. He ended the call and sat for another moment, and then he did something he almost never did in his office, in his professional space, in the architectural performance of invulnerability he maintained for the benefit of everyone who needed to believe in it. He put his face in his hands. Not for long. 12 seconds. Maybe 15. Then he picked up the phone and called Marisol. She was still in the building. She had spent the afternoon going through the executive strategy files. Damien had given her full access, everything he had sent to all three suspects, building a parallel analysis, looking for patterns in what had been leaked and what hadn't, trying to identify not just the source but the intent behind the specific selections. She answered immediately. It's Raymond, he said. She went silent. The fragment reached a Macau relay server. Jin confirmed it 40 minutes after transmission. Raymond Cho, she said. Not a question. Processing. Yes. How long? We don't know yet. The Macau server has a limited history, but given the nature of what Reyes knew about our Pacific Rim structure, he paused. Long enough. She was quiet for a moment. He heard her exhale. He was in the Nakamura meeting 3 weeks ago. He reviewed the revised partnership terms. Yes, those terms showed up in a communication from Reyes' organization to the Nakamura legal team. I flagged it as a negotiating leak. We assumed it was an outside intercept. It wasn't. No. Another pause. Where is he now? Still in the building. He has a board call at 5. I need him to make that call as though nothing has changed. You don't want him to run. I don't want him to run. And I don't want him to delete. And I don't want him to make any calls between now and tonight that he hasn't already planned to make. He paused. I need you to be in the building until he leaves. I need eyes on his behavior without him knowing he's being watched. You want me to watch a CFO for the next 3 hours and tell you if he does anything unusual. I want you to do what you do better than anyone I've ever worked with, he said, which is stand in a room and understand exactly what's happening in it without anyone knowing you're doing it. A beat. I'll stay, she said. Raymond Cho made his board call at 5 p.m. He stayed on it for 40 minutes. He was composed, thorough, and precise. The specific performance of a man who had been performing competence for so long that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing, which was perhaps the most frightening kind of betrayal. Marisol watched him through the glass partition of the third-floor conference room, visible from the hallway where she sat with her laptop open and a legal document on screen that she was not reading. She watched the cadence of his speech, the placement of his hands, the particular quality of stillness he had when he was listening versus when he was formulating. She had observed Raymond Cho in meetings for 3 years. She knew his patterns. At 5:47 p.m., while still on the board call, he reached into his jacket pocket with his left hand, not his dominant hand, and typed something on a secondary phone she had not previously seen him carry. She did not change her expression. She texted Jin 3 words. Secondary device. Now. 30 seconds later, Jin's team had the device on their monitoring list. Raymond ended the board call at 5:51. He gathered his materials with his customary precision, straightened his tie, and walked toward the elevator. As he passed Marisol in the hallway, he glanced at her with the casual, practiced warmth of a man who has been performing warmth for 15 years. Working late again, Marisol? Always, she said, smiled back, let it reach her eyes the exact right amount. Good meeting? Productive. He pressed the elevator button. Take care of yourself. You too, Raymond. The doors closed. She held the smile for exactly 2 more seconds for any residual cameras that might be watching. Then she let it go. And what was underneath it was not anger. Anger was too simple for what this was. But the specific, exhausting weight of having been surrounded by invisible architecture that other people had built around her without her knowledge or consent. And the determination, cold and absolute, to never again occupy a space she hadn't personally cleared. She texted Damien 1 word, clean. He replied immediately, Tonight, 8 o'clock. I need you there. She looked at that message for a moment. Then she typed back, I'll be there. The Westwood property was a townhouse that existed in no document connected to Damien Kwan's name, registered through 4 layers of corporate structure to an LLC that traced back to a real estate holding company in Vancouver that had been dormant for 6 years. It was the kind of place that existed specifically for conversations that needed to happen somewhere that didn't officially exist. She arrived at 7:52. Jin met her at the door. He's already here, Jin said. Is he restrained? No. He's sitting at the kitchen table drinking water and waiting. Jin paused. He knows. How? He figured it out on the drive over. Whatever Damien's people did to bring him here, he's had time to think about it, and he's a smart man. Jin looked at her steadily. He asked if you were going to be here. She felt something cold move through her. What did you tell him? Nothing. She went inside. The kitchen was white and clean and deliberately ordinary, a design normality, the kind of room that was meant to feel like nothing particular was happening in it, which made everything that was happening in it feel worse. Raymond Cho was sitting at the table exactly as Jin had described. Glass of water in front of him, both hands visible, jacket still on. 61 years old, silver-haired, with the particular physical compactness of a man who had spent his career taking up precisely the amount of space he intended, and no more. He looked at Marisol when she walked in. She looked back. Damien was standing near the window. He had not sat down. He would not sit down. She knew that about him, the way he used verticality in hard conversations, the physical refusal to be at the same level as a problem. She pulled out a chair and sat across from Raymond. Damien said nothing. He was letting her open it. She understood that without being told, and she was not sure whether to be grateful or furious about it, and she chose to simply use it. 15 years, she said. Raymond looked at her. His expression was not guilty. It was something more complicated than guilt, something that had lived with itself for long enough to have developed its own internal logic. 14, he said. 14 years and 7 months. How much of what you passed was strategic? All of it. Nakamura. Yes. The Pacific Rim restructuring terms. Yes. The Chicago situation. She watched his face. That's why Chicago went quiet. Reyes got to them first. Through you. Something moved across Raymond's face. Chicago was already compromised before I... Don't. Her voice was flat. Don't build a justification on top of it. Just answer. His jaw tightened. Yes. Chicago was part of it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside somewhere a car passed on the street. Normal Los Angeles, fully indifferent. Why? Damien said. He had not moved from the window. His voice was very even, which was its own kind of violence. Raymond looked at him. You know why? Tell me anyway. Marcus Way, Raymond said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Damien's hands, which had been still at his sides, made a single involuntary movement, fingers flexing and releasing, a fraction of a second, barely visible. Marisol caught it because she was watching for exactly that kind of thing. She didn't know the name. She filed that immediately. Another thing she didn't know that she needed to know. Marcus Way, Damien said, 11 years ago. Raymond's voice had changed. Not defensive, something rawer. You know what happened 11 years ago. You know what decision was made. You know what it cost. That decision kept this organization alive. That decision cost a man his life. Raymond's voice cracked on the last word, just once, a single fault line in the composure. A man who trusted you, who had been with you from the beginning, who brought me in, who vouched for me, who... He stopped, put his hands flat on the table, breathed. Marcus Way was my closest friend for 20 years, and you made a decision that put him in the ground to protect a deal that could have been handled another way. The room was very quiet. You've been feeding Reyes information for 14 months, Damien said, as retribution, as justice. Raymond, don't say my name like that. Raymond's voice came up hard and fast. Don't say it like I'm someone you're disappointed in. You don't get that. You don't get to be disappointed in me after what you did. He looked at Damien with the specific, concentrated fury of a person who has been holding something for 11 years and is finally setting it down by throwing it. I watched you build this empire on top of what you did. I sat beside you in every meeting. I signed every document. I told myself it was over. It was done. It was the cost of the world we live in. And I watched you go on existing like it meant nothing. It didn't mean nothing. Then why did you never say that? In 11 years, not once did you... Because saying it wouldn't have brought him back. Damien's voice dropped. And because I knew what I chose. I know what I chose. I have known every day. The silence that followed was enormous and airless. Marisol sat very still at the table. She was the only person in the room who had not known Marcus Way, who had no history with the 11 years being excavated in front of her, who was sitting in the middle of a grief and a guilt and a betrayal that predated her by nearly a decade. And she was acutely aware that her presence here, her being the person Damien had asked to be in this room, was itself a statement of something she hadn't fully parsed yet. She looked at Raymond. "What did you give Reyes about me?" she said. Raymond looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "Your personnel file," he said. "Your work history, your relationship with Damien. You told him I was significant. I told him you were the most significant vulnerability in the organization's leadership." A pause. "Because you were. Because Damien has never... In 15 years, I have never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you." He said it without cruelty, which almost made it worse. "And I needed a pressure point that worked, and you were it," Marisol breathed in. Out. She was sitting in a chair in a kitchen in Westwood, being told by a man in the middle of a 14-year grief that she had been made into a weapon, and she was very carefully deciding what to do with all of the feeling that was currently trying to occupy her chest and her throat and the backs of her hands. "You put my mother at risk," she said. Raymond closed his eyes, just briefly. "That wasn't intended. It happened anyway." "Yes. Your grief," she said carefully, "is real. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you feel about Marcus Way isn't real, but you took something real and you used it to build something that put people in danger who had nothing to do with the decision you're still angry about. And that is not justice. That's just spreading damage." Raymond opened his eyes. He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said, quietly. The two-word version of everything collapsing. Damien moved from his window. He came to the table and pulled out a chair and sat down, which meant something. She knew it meant something, the deliberate choice to stop using height as distance, to be at the same level, in the same small circle of consequence. "Tell me everything you gave them," he said. "All of it, from the beginning." Raymond looked at him. Something in his face was deciding something. "And then what?" he said. "After I tell you. Then we figure out what comes next." "That's not an answer." "No," Damien said. "It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Marcus was my friend too. I want you to know that. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. And what happened 11 years ago is something I made a choice about, and I will carry that choice, and there is no accounting I can offer you that makes it balance." He paused. "But I need to know what Reyes has, because if this stays broken, more people get hurt. Not me, not you. People who have nothing to do with 11 years ago." Raymond looked at Marisol when Damien said that. She held his gaze. Something in him went out, like a light being switched off. Not extinguished exactly, but redirected, turned inward. A man returning to himself after a long time away, and finding the house smaller than he remembered. He started talking. He talked for 90 minutes. Jin was in the next room recording. Marisol took notes by hand, not because she needed to, but because the physical act of writing kept her present, kept her hands occupied, kept the part of her that was still processing "you were the most significant vulnerability" from breaking the surface. The picture that assembled itself was thorough and damaging, and in some respects more targeted than they had understood. Reyes had not been building a hostile takeover. He had been building a dossier, a comprehensive package of Blackstone's internal vulnerabilities, strategic decisions, financial exposures, and relationship architecture, with the intention of presenting it to the federal authorities as an anonymous tip, wrapped in just enough legitimate business intelligence to be credible, at a moment when the Pacific Rim partners were already being advised to distance themselves. A three-front assault: regulatory, financial, and organizational confidence. simultaneous, designed to be unrecoverable. The Thursday meeting with the Pacific Rim partners was not just a persuasion attempt. It was the delivery mechanism for the federal referral, timed to hit when Blackstone's partners were already preparing to pull out. "When does the referral file?" Damien said. "Friday morning. If Thursday goes the way Reyes plans it." "Who files it?" "A lawyer. Clean hands. No visible connection to Reyes. Someone with standing and credibility." Raymond paused. "Someone you won't see coming." "Name," Raymond told him. Damien sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he stood up from the table and walked to the far end of the kitchen and stood with his back to the room, one hand on the counter, and he stayed there for a while. Marisol looked at the name she'd written in her notes. The name was Eleanor Kwan, Damien's younger sister, a federal attorney with 15 years in white-collar crime prosecution. A woman who had spent her entire career scrupulously avoiding any appearance of connection to her brother's empire, and who had apparently decided that the time for scrupulous distance was over. He turned back from the counter. His face was constructed very carefully into nothing. "Eleanor," he said. The word came out flat and small and completely stripped of affect. "She approached Reyes 8 months ago," Raymond said. "She had evidence of her own, independent of what I gave him. From before you built the legitimate side of the business, from the early days." He paused. "She's not doing this for Reyes. She's doing this because she has been building a case against you for 3 years, and she finally found a mechanism to use it." "My sister is the fourth camera," Marisol said quietly. Both men looked at her. "The camera in the parking garage that none of us knew about," she said. "Not Reyes's people, not Gideon's people. Hers." She met Damien's eyes. "She's been watching you independently. She knows about me. She knows about last night." She paused. "She knows about today." Damien's hand was still on the counter. His knuckles, she noticed, were white. "If Gideon neutralizes Reyes and Raymond tells us everything he has, and we lock down the Thursday meeting," she said, keeping her voice very even, very deliberate, "Eleanor still has what she has, and Eleanor doesn't need Reyes to file." "No," Damien said. "She doesn't. So everything we've done today, the trap for Raymond, the Gideon meeting, the Cleo Vance removal, none of it addresses the actual threat." "No." The kitchen was very quiet. "Can you call her?" Marisol said. He looked at her. "Your sister. Can you call her and get her in a room?" "She won't come." "Not if you ask her as a brother." Marisol stood up from the table. Her legs were steady. She was running on something beneath adrenaline now, the specific, clean energy of a person who has passed through fear and come out the other side into a kind of absolute clarity. "But she might come if someone else asks her." "Who?" Marisol picked up her notepad. "She's a federal attorney who has been building a case against her brother for 3 years," she said, "which means she has a conscience, which means she has limits." She looked at Damien steadily. "Which means there might be a version of this where what she actually wants is not to destroy you, but to make you answer for something specific. And the question is whether you are prepared to answer for it." The room was very quiet. Damien looked at her for a long time. "Marcus Way," he said. "Yes." He breathed in, out, the specific breath of a man standing at the edge of the thing he has been carrying for 11 years and finally setting it down. Not because the ground is good, not because the timing is right, but because the weight has become the only thing left and he cannot carry it and build anything new at the same time. "I'll call her," he said. "Tonight," Marisol said. "Tonight." She picked up her bag. She looked at Raymond, who was still sitting at the table with his hands flat in front of him, looking like a man who had finally put down something very heavy and was not sure the act of putting it down had changed anything or simply revealed the damage underneath. "Raymond." She waited until he looked at her. "Whatever comes next, you cooperate with everything. Full cooperation. Every communication, every document, every date and detail. You owe that. Not to Damien, to the people who got caught in the middle of a grief that wasn't theirs." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She walked to the door. She heard Damien's voice behind her, low and careful. "Marisol." She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for being in that room." She did not say "you're welcome" because it wasn't that kind of thanks, and they both knew it. She put her hand on the door. Call your sister tonight, she said, before she calls anyone else. She walked out into the Los Angeles evening, into the amber and silver light of a city that never quite went dark. And she stood beside her car for a moment before getting in. And she felt, under the exhaustion and the residual fear and the complicated weight of everything that had been dismantled and rebuilt in the last 36 hours, something she didn't have a clean word for. Not hope exactly. Not relief. Something more structural than either of those. Something that felt like the moment after a long storm when the air is cold and clear, and you can see exactly how far you have come and exactly how far there still is to go. She got in the car. She drove 12 blocks before her phone rang. Unknown number. Los Angeles area code. Not the same one as this morning. She answered. Ms. Brooks. The voice was precise, controlled, and unmistakably familiar, even though she had never spoken to this woman before. The same cadence as Damien's, the same compressed stillness, deployed differently. My name is Eleanor Kwan. My brother doesn't know I'm calling you. I'd like to talk before he does. Marisol's hand tightened on the wheel. She kept driving. Where? She said. Eleanor Kwan chose a diner in Culver City. Not a restaurant, not a private room. A diner. The kind with vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting and a laminated menu that hadn't changed in 20 years. The kind of place where two women sitting across from each other look like nothing more than two women sitting across from each other. Unremarkable, invisible, beneath the notice of anyone who might be watching. She was already there when Marisol arrived. Booth in the back corner, facing the door. Coffee in front of her, black, untouched. 40 years old, lean in the way of someone who runs not for fitness, but for the particular mental clarity that comes from sustained physical effort, with Damien's bone structure worn differently, sharper, less composed, the same architecture expressed in a face that had spent its lifetime refusing the masks her brother had perfected. She watched Marisol cross the diner and said nothing until Marisol sat down. You drove here alone, Eleanor said. Yes. He doesn't know you're here. No. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. The evaluation in it was professional and thorough and not unkind. I've been watching Blackstone Tower for 4 months, she said. I've read everything Raymond Cho passed to Reyes's organization. I have my own files, older, more specific, more legally actionable. She paused. And I've been watching you for most of that time. I know. Then you know I'm not doing this for Reyes. I know, Marisol said again. You're doing it for Marcus Way. Eleanor's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it back down carefully. Raymond told you? Raymond told Damien. Damien told me. Marisol folded her hands on the table. I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly because I'm very tired, and I've been inside a very long day, and I don't have the bandwidth for anything indirect. Eleanor waited. Is what you have enough to put your brother in federal prison? A long pause. Eleanor looked at her coffee, then at the table, then at Marisol. Yes, she said. For how long? 12 to 18 years, minimum, depending on the judge and how cooperative he is with the subsequent investigation into his partner organizations. She paused. Which he would not be, so probably the higher end. Marisol breathed in through her nose. And Reyes, his involvement in using your case as cover for a hostile business takeover, does that compromise the legal integrity of what you've built? Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this since I pulled out of the parking garage an hour ago. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Reyes's involvement is a problem, she said finally. If a defense attorney can demonstrate that the federal referral was coordinated with a business competitor as part of a market consolidation strategy, it introduces reasonable doubt about the independence of the investigation. It doesn't destroy the case, but it complicates it significantly. Enough to matter in court. Potentially. Marisol looked at her steadily. So Reyes, by using your work for his own purposes, has inadvertently damaged the legal tool you spent 3 years building. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Yes. Does your brother know about Marcus Way? He knows what he did. That's not what I asked. Does he know what it cost you? Eleanor looked at her, and for the first time the professional precision of her expression shifted into something underneath it. Something older and more damaged and more human than the federal attorney who had chosen a corner booth with sightlines to the door. Marcus Way was my brother too, Eleanor said. Her voice was very quiet. Not blood, but the kind of person who shows up when everything else falls apart and just stands there. He was 28 when Damien made the decision that killed him. He had a daughter. She was 4. She stopped, breathed. I watched Damien keep building. I watched him become more powerful, more untouchable, more insulated from every consequence of every choice he has ever made. And I decided that if the world would not hold him accountable, I would. Yes, even if it destroyed you both. Yes. Marisol was quiet for a moment. The diner hummed around them. The sound of other lives, other tables, the clink of cutlery, and the distant bell of a door opening and closing. I want you to hear something, Marisol said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. Eleanor waited. I'm not here to protect Damien Kwan, Marisol said. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not his partner. I'm not his advocate. And I have no interest in asking you to bury something true because it inconveniences someone I care about. That is not who I am, and I will not be it. She held Eleanor's gaze. But I'm asking you to consider what justice actually looks like versus what destruction looks like, because those are not always the same thing, and I think you know that. Eleanor's eyes were very still. Marcus Way's daughter is 15 years old now, Marisol continued. You told me you did this for her, in effect, for the accounting of a life that mattered. And I am asking you, what does she actually need? Does she need her father's memory honored by a prosecution that gets compromised in court by Reyes's fingerprints and ends with a reduced sentence and an appeal and 5 years of legal proceedings that keep the wound open and give it nothing to heal around? She paused. Or does she need something else? Like what? Eleanor said. Her voice was tight. Like the truth, Marisol said. Said out loud. By the person who owes it. In a room where it can be heard. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Outside the window, Culver City moved through its evening with complete indifference. You want Damien to confess, mate? Eleanor said. I want Damien to reckon, Marisol said. There's a difference. A confession is a legal document. A reckoning is a human one. She looked at Eleanor carefully. Your case, compromised by Reyes, goes to court and maybe wins and maybe doesn't. Either way, what Marcus's daughter gets is a proceeding, a transaction, evidence and counter-evidence and legal language around the worst thing that ever happened to her family. She paused. Or Reyes gets neutralized, which Gideon Park is doing tonight regardless. And your brother sits across from you and says, without lawyers, without strategy, without an audience, what he chose and why and what it cost, and that he has carried it. She breathed. Which of those is justice, truly? Eleanor looked at her for a very long time. You're asking me to give up 3 years of work, she said. I'm asking you to decide what the 3 years were actually for. The diner was quiet around them. Eleanor picked up her coffee, drank it finally, cold now, and she registered that with a faint wince but kept drinking. She set the cup down. She looked at the table. He would have to mean it, she said. Yes. Not a performance, not damage control. If it's a performance, you file, Marisol said simply. I'll help you. I will personally give you everything I have access to, and I will sit in that courtroom, and I will tell the truth about every document I ever touched. She held Eleanor's gaze. But give him the chance to be a human being first. Give yourself the chance to find out whether there's anything left in him worth the word. Eleanor looked at her for a long time. Why are you doing this? She said, finally. You have everything to gain from walking away from his world completely. From this mess. From all of it. Marisol was quiet for a moment. Because I know what it costs to be angry for a long time, she said, and I know what it costs to let it define everything you build. She paused. And because Marcus Way's daughter deserves better than to be collateral in a war between two siblings who both loved her father and never said it to each other. Eleanor closed her eyes. She sat like that for a long time. Marisol did not fill the silence. She had learned over many years in rooms with powerful and damaged people that silence was sometimes the only space in which genuine decisions could be made. Call him, Eleanor said finally. Her eyes were still closed. Tell him to come here. Damien arrived in 22 minutes. He came through the diner door and saw them in the back booth and stopped walking for just a moment. A single beat of visible shock at the sight of his sister and the woman he loved sitting across from each other in a fluorescent-lit diner in Culver City. And then he came forward, because Damien Kwan, whatever else he was, had never in his life walked away from a thing he needed to face. He slid into the booth beside Marisol, not across from Eleanor, beside Marisol, close enough that their arms nearly touched, the specific proximity of two people who have spent 3 years maintaining careful distance and have finally, in the accumulated weight of the last 48 hours, run out of reasons to keep performing it. Eleanor looked at him across the table. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Ellie, he said finally. The name came out stripped of everything. No strategy, no armor, just the sound of a person using a name they have not said in a long time. Because saying it meant acknowledging what the distance between them had cost. Eleanor's throat moved. You're going to tell me about Marcus, she said. All of it. What happened? Why you made the choice you made. What it has been inside you since. She paused. And you're going to tell me to my face, not through a lawyer and not through a statement, and not through the particular performance of remorse that powerful men produce for the benefit of cameras. Her voice was very steady and very breakable at the same time, the specific tension of something held together by discipline alone. Do you understand? Yes, he said. Then talk. He looked at his hands on the table. They were still. The deliberate stillness he had trained into himself over decades. And then, slowly, something in that stillness released, the way ice releases at the edge, almost imperceptible until it isn't. He talked. He talked for a long time. He talked about the night 11 years ago when the decision had to be made in under 4 minutes, between two options that were both catastrophic, in a room where 4 people were waiting for him to be the one who chose. He talked about what Marcus had said to him the day before, not knowing it would be the last conversation they had. He talked about what it had felt like to make the choice, and then to watch the choice become irreversible and to understand, in the specific permanent clarity of an irreversible moment, that there was no version of himself going forward that did not contain this. He talked about Marcus's daughter. He knew her name. He had kept track of her from a distance for 11 years, quietly, in the way of someone who cannot step forward and cannot look away. He knew she was 15 now. He knew she was in a school in Pasadena on a partial scholarship that had been arranged through 4 layers of anonymized funding. Eleanor's head came up when he said that. The Meridian Scholarship, she said. Yes. That's been funding her school since she was 9. Yes. Eleanor stared at him. That's you. Yes. She looked at the table. Something in her face was doing something complicated and structural, like a building that has taken a hit and is deciding whether to stand. Why didn't you tell anyone? She said. Because it wasn't something I was owed credit for, he said. It was a thing I did because she existed and she deserved not to be punished for choices that weren't hers. It wasn't generosity. It was the minimum. The diner was very quiet. Marcus knew, Damien said. Before he died. He knew the choice was coming. We both knew. He told me. He stopped. His voice had gone somewhere rough and difficult. He let it stay there. He did not smooth it over. He told me not to let the organization die for him. He said it wasn't worth it. He said. He stopped again, pressed his lips together. He told me his daughter's name and he made me say it back to him. And then he said, okay, and that was the last word. The last word sat in the middle of the table between all 3 of them. Eleanor was crying. She was doing it in the same way Marisol had cried weeks ago in the dark office. Very quietly, very controlled, the crying of someone who has trained themselves to take up as little space as possible even in grief. She was not looking at Damien. She was looking at her coffee cup, and her shoulders were very still, and 2 tears moved down her face, and she let them without wiping them. Marisol did not look away from either of them. She sat in the booth beside Damien and held the space, because that was what the moment needed. Not words, not intervention, not management, just presence. They sat like that for a long time. Eleanor left at midnight. She shook Marisol's hand at the door. A real handshake, full grip, direct eye contact. the handshake of one person recognizing another. "The file," Eleanor said. "Your choice," Marisol said. Eleanor looked at her for a moment. "It took 3 years to build." "I know. If I close it, it's gone. There's no reopening it without what Rhea's contaminated." "I know. He doesn't get to be comfortable," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet and absolute. "Whatever else happens, whatever you two build and wherever this organization goes from here, he doesn't get to be comfortable. He answers for what he is. He spends the rest of his life in a world that is smaller than it would have been if he had built it differently. That is the cost. That is the accounting I need." "Yes," Marisol said. Eleanor looked at her brother, who was standing 3 feet away with his hands in his pockets and his face open in a way she had not seen since they were children. "I need to meet her," Eleanor said, "Marcus's daughter. I need to be in a room with her and tell her what her father was, from someone who knew him." "Yes," Damien said. "I'll arrange it." "Not through 4 layers of corporate structure," Eleanor said. "You, in person. She deserves to see the face." A pause. "Yes," he said. Eleanor looked between them one more time. The look of a woman calibrating, not forgiving, not releasing, but deciding that there is more than one form of accountability, and she has perhaps been building only one of them. She walked out. The diner door swung closed behind her. Damien and Marisol sat back down in the booth. Neither of them spoke for a while. The diner was nearly empty now. A late-shift waiter restocking napkins near the counter. A couple in a booth by the window splitting a piece of pie. The quiet infrastructure of a place doing its ordinary work. Marisol looked at the table. "The Thursday meeting," she said. "Gideon's people will handle it. Reyes will be intercepted before he reaches the first partner." He paused. "That part is over." "Raymond. He cooperates fully. In exchange for that, he leaves. No criminal referral, no internal action. He goes quietly and he's done." He paused again. "He's already gone, I think. What was in that room tonight?" "That was a man who had already left." She nodded. "Cleo Vance. Removed this afternoon. Jin handled it clean." "Your cameras, in the building. Being audited tomorrow. Every camera, every feed, every access credential. You'll have final approval on the security architecture." She looked at him. "That's a significant amount of operational trust to extend to someone who is still technically your executive assistant." "You're not my executive assistant," he said. "You haven't been for some time. I just haven't had the appropriate conversation yet." She was quiet for a moment. "I meant what I said. I won't stay in a support role. If I'm doing this kind of work, if I was in that room tonight, if I sat across from Gideon Park and negotiated conditions, if I called Eleanor Kwan and ran that conversation, I am not an assistant. I am an executive. And I want my own division, my own mandate, my own team, and my own name on the organizational chart." "Executive Director of Global Strategy," he said. "Full authority over international operations, direct board reporting, compensation at the senior executive level." He paused. "I had Jin draft the preliminary structure this afternoon, before I knew how tonight would go. Because regardless of how tonight went, it was already true." She looked at him carefully. "You drafted it before you knew?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's overdue," he said. "And because I have been making decisions about your professional life by omission for 3 years, and I promised you everything, and that includes the things I should have said out loud a long time ago." She sat with that for a moment. "I want to review the structure before I sign anything," she said. "Of course. And I want the announcement made internally before it's made externally. I want the people in that building to understand that this is a professional appointment based on professional merit before any other narrative has a chance to form." "Agreed. And the personal thing still waits," he said, "until you say otherwise." She looked at him across the table. In the fluorescent diner light, he looked like what he actually was. A man in his mid-40s who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had put some of it down tonight and still had more to carry, who had built an empire and filled it with absence and was only now, slowly, learning to be present in his own life. He was not a simple man. He was not a clean one. He had made choices that had cost people, and he would live inside those choices for the rest of his life. She had known all of this. She had known it for 3 years. She reached across the table and put her hand flat on top of his. She did not hold it. She just placed it there. her hand on his, in a fluorescent diner in Culver City, at midnight, after the longest 48 hours of her professional life. A simple, declarative gesture. Not a promise, not a beginning, a statement of the present. I am here, and I'm choosing to be here. And that is a real thing, even though everything is complicated. He turned his hand over under hers, palm up, not gripping, offering. The same restraint she had always known in him, redirected. He was very still. They stayed like that for a while. 3 months later, the announcement ran in the Financial Times. Blackstone Global names. Marisol Brooks, Executive Director of Global Strategy. The international investment firm has restructured its senior leadership, appointing longtime operations architect Marisol Brooks to lead its expanded global strategy division. Brooks, 34, has been instrumental in navigating the firm's recent Pacific Rim restructuring and is credited by Blackstone's board with stabilizing the organization's partner network during a period of significant external pressure. Not a word about anything else, just her name, her title, her work. She read it at her desk, her new desk, in her new office on the 41st floor, the one with a window that faced west toward the ocean, which she had chosen specifically because it was not the CEO's office and not adjacent to it, and was, geographically and symbolically, her own. Her phone had been ringing since 6 a.m., colleagues, former professors. Her mother, who had cried for 11 minutes and then composed herself and said, "I always knew, baby, I always knew," and then cried for another 4 minutes. She let the calls go to voicemail. She sat in her office and read the article one more time and felt something she had not felt in a very long time and had been too careful to let herself feel. Not pride exactly, though it was adjacent to pride. Something more foundational. The particular satisfaction of a thing being true in the world that you had believed was true about yourself long before anyone else could see it. There was a knock at her open door. Vivian Park was standing in it. Marisol had not seen her since the morning of the Gideon meeting, 2 weeks before. She looked different, not dramatically, not in any way that would read as transformation in a movie, but in the specific way that people look when they have been sleeping better, when the particular tension of performing a life that doesn't fit has been removed. She was wearing a dark blue coat and carrying a small wrapped package. "I know this is irregular," Vivian said. "Come in." Vivian came in. She set the package on the desk. "Congratulations. This is not a peace offering. I don't believe we need peace because I don't believe we were ever at war." She paused. "It's a first edition copy of a book about negotiation strategy that I have found genuinely useful, not a gesture, a useful thing from someone who respects useful people." Marisol looked at the package, then at Vivian. "Thank you. I'm rebuilding," Vivian said. "My own structure, independent of the park organization, independent of Damien's. I have capital, and I have patience, and I have apparently more appetite for risk than I previously understood." A brief dry pause that was almost a smile. "I may need a strategic advisor at some point, someone who understands international operations and can navigate complex organizational politics without losing their integrity." Marisol looked at her steadily. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm planting a seed," Vivian said. "You're clearly committed here, for now. But you're also clearly someone who will outgrow every room she's put in, and when that happens, I'd like you to remember this conversation." "I'll remember it." Vivian nodded once. "Enjoy the article." She turned toward the door, then she stopped without turning back. "He's different," she said quietly. "Damien, whatever happened in the last few months, he's different in a way I haven't seen since before everything became about the Empire." She paused. "That's your doing. I don't say it to assign you credit or to imply anything. I say it because it's true, and I am trying, in this stage of my life, to say the true thing out loud when I have the opportunity." She walked out. Marisol sat alone in her office and looked at the wrapped package and the open door and the west-facing window with the distant silver line of the Pacific just barely visible on clear days. That evening, late, she walked past the old office. Not to go in. She had no reason to go in. It was Damien's office. Had always been Damien's office, would continue to be Damien's office in the new configuration and in every configuration going forward. She simply walked past it because her route to the elevator took her past it, and she had not rerouted out of habit or avoidance. The door was open. He was at his desk. Jacket off, the way he always was late at night. A file open in front of him that he was not reading because he was looking at the window instead. At the east-facing Los Angeles skyline. At the specific amber and silver city that never completely went dark. He heard her footsteps and looked up. She stopped in the hallway. Not in the doorway. In the hallway, which was her space, which was the corridor between the private and the professional, which was, she had decided, where she was comfortable standing right now. The Marcus Way Foundation files came through legal today, she said. Everything structured correctly. Eleanor reviewed the final documents. She said, she paused. She said it's the right size. Not too large to be performative. Not too small to be meaningful. He looked at her. Good. She's meeting the daughter on Saturday. I know. I'll be there. Are you ready for that? He considered the question honestly, which she had noticed he did more often now. The genuine consideration of a hard question rather than the immediate performance of competence. No, he said, but I'll be there anyway. She nodded. The old overcoat was still on its hook beside his door. She could see it from the hallway. It had been there for 3 years, through all of it, the late nights and the impossible decisions and the accumulated weight of two people who had been trying very hard not to want things they could not have. It looked exactly like what it was. An ordinary coat. Heavy wool, dark. The kind of thing that kept out the cold and nothing else. She looked at it for a moment. I should go, she said. Marisol. She waited. The dust is clear, he said. She looked at him. He was sitting very still at his desk, his hands flat on the open file, looking at her with the specific quality of a man who has said the difficult thing and is now, for the first time in a very long time, not calculating the response, not managing the fallout, not building around the feeling, just sitting inside it and waiting. The dust is clear. She stood in the hallway for a moment. She looked at the overcoat. She looked at him. Ask me properly, she said. Not in an office, not after midnight with paperwork in front of you. She paused. Somewhere that has nothing to do with this building. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, more than relief. The specific expression of a man who has carried something for 3 years and has just been told he is allowed to put it down and hold something else instead. Friday, he said. I have the Nakamura call in the morning. After. She looked at him one more moment. Then she turned and walked to the elevator, and she pressed the button, and she stood waiting for the car. And she allowed herself, in the empty hallway of the 41st floor of Blackstone Tower, entirely alone, where no camera she knew of was watching, to feel the full, complicated, imperfect, unresolved, and resolving warmth of having gotten through the worst of it and being still standing on the other side. The elevator opened. She stepped in. 41 floors below, Los Angeles waited in its amber and silver, enormous and indifferent, and full of people doing impossible things quietly. She rode down through all of it. And when the doors opened at the lobby, she walked out into the night without looking back, because the night was real, and it was hers, and everything that came next was going to be built on ground she had cleared herself with her own hands, in her own name. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. End.